G'day everybody. I've had some questions before about my process to planning a workshop, and funnily enough, this week I have to plan two workshops. For one in the academy that I'm running with my teachers, and I'm going to be doing another workshop for an external academy. So I thought I'd put together this video of me going through everything, basically from start to finish. So I'm only going to focus on one of the workshops and basically show you guys what I do in my planning process and my thoughts. And I'm going to try and explain some of the things behind, or my reasoning behind what I've got. To give you a bit of context, the workshop that I'm going to be focusing on is the workshop that I'm going to be running in the academy with my teachers. At the start of the year, we conducted a needs analysis and looked at teachers' previous experience. We looked at their needs and their wants from self-assessments and from looking at our drop-in observations and so on and so forth. And basically a common theme that came up was developing speaking skills. So this term, I'm looking at the development, the workshop plan that we've developed for this term. It's basically we're focusing on developing and assessing speaking. So last week we had a guest speaker come in, one of our former teachers. He delivered a workshop on how to develop speaking skills in teens and adults. And this week we're actually going to be going for young learners. So the similar kind of session, how to develop speaking skills in young learners. And the reason for this is, we have acknowledged that there's a difference between teens and adults and young learners, especially when we consider the sort of the SLA element there, and the reliance on, for example, implicit and explicit knowledge. So what am I doing today then? Well, I'm going to be creating this workshop. I've been super busy as of late. Normally I would have done this a few weeks in advance, but because I have just got back from Australia and I'm catching up on work, I'm just getting to it now. So I'm going to set the camera up here, and then I'll just keep working, and then throughout I'm going to just be explaining a few things. So yeah, we'll see how well this goes. I haven't really planned this. It was just a sort of spur of the moment thing, because I remember that there was this question in the back of my mind. But yeah, we'll see how it goes, and I look forward to hearing from you. Okay, so I've just gone through the first kind of stage in what I do, and it's basically I create like a little mind map. I'll make sure to put a photo of this in the video. This mind map basically it tells me all of the components that I want to have in my workshop. And so, for example, here I've got developing speaking in young learners, and if we go around the mind map, it basically we're going to sort of have a look at what I have. We can see that I've got setting of the gender. I think it's important, and kind of modeling what we'd like teachers to do in their own lessons, setting agenda, setting success criteria, things like that. Definitely going to have some kind of component that looks at the exploration of values, attitudes and beliefs, bringing these opinions and experiences to the surface, helping teachers make explicit their beliefs, really. And I also think having that component in there, in fact it's a staple in all of my workshops, is that it centers teachers and gets them on board with what we want to be looking at. Because this is a workshop that's in a kind of strand, we're going to be having a look at, there's going to be some kind of connection to the previous workshop. The trainer that ran the previous workshop looked at developing speaking in teens and adults, so we're going to have some kind of revision or recycling of material and ideas there. Again, trying to model what we want to occur in our classes. Again, this is not necessarily in an order, it's just the ideas that I want to have in there. So I'm definitely going to have some practical ideas, some speaking activities for young learners in here, also because at the start of the year we asked teachers, where do you want to be on the spectrum of theoretically focused or practical focused? And most of them have said, let's say 70% practical, 30% theory. there's definitely going to be lots of practical speaking activities in here. Now I've got thinking questions here. Now thinking questions is something that come up spontaneously. It's kind of a modification of an idea that I got from a book, and basically I want teachers to be thinking of questions that are relevant to these ideas that come up, but also for me, if I hear something that happens in the session, I want to exploit that. I don't want to be stuck to my plan. I want to, if there's room to go deeper into something that's valuable, I want to leave space for that. There definitely needs to be some kind of connection to SLA. And some of the areas where I've thought about here is looking at the idea of, what's the impact of exposure on young learner speaking abilities? How do sensitive periods come into this? We used to say critical periods, we don't really say that anymore, but for the sake of things, we can think of critical periods. What's the role of implicit and explicit knowledge, and how does teaching methodology impact the ability for young learners to speak in our context? So there's a lot in there, and I need to work out how to pack it in or explore it in a way that's not boring for teachers and is just not transmissive, that I'm just going to just give it to them as a lecture. And so perhaps I'm thinking maybe some kind of jigsaw activity, or maybe some kind of buzz lecture. So yeah, I had to think of that. Definitely going to have some kind of reflection activity in there, really, really important. And going to try to connect a lot of the content from the workshop to the mission statement. So at the start of the year, at the end of the last year, our team got together and we revised our mission statement. So we looked at what our mission statement wants to be as a team, and within our mission statements, I've got it up here. One of them was cultivate the value of listening and allow for silent periods. So this is quite important when working with young learners, where there's often an emphasis on production, but really there needs to be an emphasis on exposure and allowing learners to build that, that the amount of time that they've had with English before they're forced to produce. So there's a strong rationale for connecting it to that as well. So yeah, that's the first part. That's generally what I do to get started. Again, here's a picture of it. And now we go into the more difficult one, is what's actually putting it all together. So let's do that now. Okay, so where am I now? What I've just done is I've taken the ideas from my mind map and have put them down into a session outline. So basically, conceptualized the things that I would like in the session, and now have got the kind of provisional session outline. And I'll just talk us through that at the moment. So what I've got here, and I'll put a picture up. What I've got here is I'm starting off with an agenda. I'm going to be looking at, what am I going to be doing with teachers, and I'd like to ask them the question about, what they want to get out of it. We're going to have a stage that focuses on the exploration of, values, attitudes, and beliefs. And I'm not sure how to do that at the moment, but some of the ideas that I've got is like maybe having a 5-scale agree or disagree with statements, maybe have a ranking activity, or perhaps some questions related to experiences and difficulties with working with young learners and speaking. And I think there's perhaps going to be some questions that come out there about age. Young learners are still quite, looking from 3 to 10, 12. There's quite a range in there. So that could be something to explore there. I'm going to have a flexi stage here. So flexi stage, I mean that's something that I can choose to include or not. And this is basically to give me space for those thinking questions. If there's something that comes up and I want to explore deeper with teachers, that could be a good opportunity to do so. We're then going to move into the content delivery part of the session. And I've decided on perhaps 3 or 4 areas that I'd like the content to focus on, although I haven't decided on the actual delivery of the content. So I'm going to be focusing on oracy development in young learners, looking at the importance of exposure and developing receptive awareness first. Looking at, there's a lovely quote in here from this book. You would have seen that I've gone to my bookshelf and got lots of books. That's usually a common thing I do. So there's a brilliant quote in here that looks at, I'll read it for you just so you get it. Learners do not begin the process of acquiring their L1 by speaking it. Rather, they match what they hear in the input to the objects and actions around them, and thereby acquire new words and grammatical forms. Input-based tasks cater to this process. So basically what I'm trying to get there, I'd like to, if we're thinking about that awareness, that often in mainstream ELT we have this focus on production even from the very, very early age, when from an SLA perspective, production is not the goal. Exposure and awareness is. Production is not discouraged, but we need to be aware that that's not the goal at the very young learner age. So in our level system in the academy, level 1 and 2, they're still like 4 or 5 there. And so we're still really not wanting them to produce that much. It's really exposure. And when we get to levels 3 and 4, that's perhaps where a lot of these speaking activities are going to come into place. Doesn't mean that we can't focus on speaking on level 1 and 2, but certainly that's not the goal of those lessons. So there was that, and I'd also like to focus on perhaps the affective element of speaking, and perhaps bringing in TPR as well. So some ideas that I've got for the content there is maybe a set of Socratic questioning. This is a book that I go to pretty much for every session that I plan. It's called Ways of Training by Tessa Woodward. It has loads of different ideas in there. Some of the other books that I go to are things like Models and Metaphors, again by Tessa Woodward, Practical Introduction to Teacher to EFT by Hughes, and Martin Parrott's Tasks for Language Teachers. Some great resources there, and they have helped me a million. So after that, I'll be looking at the activities, the practical side of things. So my idea at the moment is to have about 8 different activities that would be applicable to a young learner classroom for developing speaking skills. So things like disappearing dialogues, jazz chants, TPR word with body position based on stress and pronunciation, talking points, modeling oracy, pebbles, oracy cue cards, tally charts. So what I would like to do then is present teachers with a list of either lesson plans or lesson transcripts, potential lesson transcripts of these being used, and then for them to evaluate these based on a set of questions that we come up with. And perhaps we could rank them also in terms of what age would these potentially work with if we're looking at that level 1 to level 6 in our academy. Following this, that's going to take up quite a bit of time. So following this, I'm going to have another flexi stage of thinking questions. I think it's going to be, because while they're doing this, I'm going to be monitoring and moving around and taking a look at what they're doing. And then from there, if I have any thinking questions, that would be a great moment to explore that. It's also a good moment, I think, to connect to the mission statement. So perhaps there's some things that I can raise awareness of there. I imagine we only have an hour and a half for this workshop, so I imagine we'll be almost at the end there. So that will lead us into a reflection. I'd like to have probably a good 10 minutes for reflection. And my activity that I'm going to choose is a standard for me: the suitcase, the freezer, the bin. So I'm going to get them to put something that they can take away and implement immediately their own context in the suitcase. And then the freezer, something that they liked but they can't use at the moment, or they don't want to use at the moment, so it's for the future. And then the bin. Now the bin is something that they didn't think was useful, but if they put it in there, they have to justify why it's there. And then I've got some notes for the post session. The post session, I'm going to be sending out an email summary with the main points and some articles to take their learning of this further. And then also I'm going to send them a workshop feedback form so they can give me some feedback. So this is the second stage of my sort of planning process. So you see we've got the mind map, and then we go to the session outline, and now we move into making it all look amazing. So this is where I'm going to turn to the computer and I'm going to start writing out everything and creating materials. So let's get into that now. Okay, so I've finished my session planning. The first part, as you saw, that I created my mind map, then I went to do my session overview. Now what I've just spent over the last probably hour and a half, 2 hours, is going through and creating my session plan in detail. So what I did, this is a bit of a back and forth process where I'm writing my session over plan, but I'm also focusing on my materials. Now, depending on the session, I'd probably either go more with the overview first and then the materials, or with the materials and then the overview. Personally, I like to work from materials first because it helps me see how or what I'm going to be using, and then doing, looking at all the instructions and how that goes around that. But for this session, I started with the overview and started working out what I wanted to include first, and then created some of the materials and then went back and forth from that way. So in the time that you've been here with me, these are some of the things that I've created. So I've done my plan, I've created a set of handouts which include some activities for teachers to self-assess against. So for example, their success criteria for the session. I've got a section in there which is asking them to explore their values, attitudes and beliefs and experiences with teaching young learners. I've also got a section in there looking at lecture keywords. I'm going to be providing a lecture, a short 5-minute lecture on developing speaking skills in young learners in this session. But what I've done is actually taken an idea from this great book, Ways of Training, and given lecture keywords. I'm actually going to send them out before the session. But anyway, I'm going to get teachers to have a look at these keywords and think about what they mean, look at connections. And then I'm going to provide the lecture, which I've recorded, and then I've given them a mind map that they need to complete during the lecture. The reason I'm giving them a mind map is I want them to be able to take something away. Now, I actually have created a trainer's version mind map as well for us to discuss if necessary, although I don't think it'll be that necessary. I've also created an evaluation table because in the later stage of the session, teachers are going to be moving around the academy looking at some ideas that I'm going to be presenting on developing speaking skills in young learners with a focus primarily on oracy. And so they're going to be evaluating them, and I've created like an evaluation table here that says, what does this develop, what age group or level would you use it with, rate this activity in terms of usefulness, and do you see any issues with this activity? And then we're going to come back into our plenary. And then there's the reflection stage that's included in the handouts. So I've also identified a number of activities in there, created some materials for those. I had to create a QR code that leads to a video for one of them. And so that's pretty much it. I'm not sure exactly how long I've been here with you guys. I did take a break. In fact, I recorded the second half of this video the next day just because I had some things to do in the afternoon yesterday. But I imagine it's around 2.5 hours, something like that. So the question comes then, I'm spending longer on the session, on planning the session than I'm actually delivering the session. And you might think that's a bit crazy. But look at it this way. So this session I'm going to run with these teachers, in my context, developed for a specific need. But that doesn't mean that this session is just forgotten now. In fact, I use these moments of delivering this session to try it out, basically. And then I can keep this session, modify it however it needs to be for future, even in my own context, with new teachers, or external sessions, or perhaps even at a conference and things like that. So this work, this time that's put into it, I don't see as wasted. In fact, I see it as very beneficial. But certainly, there's a lot of work that goes into a session like this. I will put up some pictures and things of that, and so you can all have a look. And really the purpose of this kind of ad hoc video was to give you an overview of how I would go about planning a session, and the amount of time that I'd probably put into it. And I'm looking forward to hearing your thoughts.